Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be going into my top 20 quarterback and tight end rankings for week number 2 of the 2024 fantasy football season. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you're doing up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. And if you like access to my updated rankings, if I make any changes after today's video, make sure you guys check out the Patreon, link in the video description, for $7.50. I also answer all of the questions that you guys leave on there. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 2 top 20 quarterback and tight end rankings and tiers. We begin with the S tier at the quarterback position for week number 2 with my quarterbacks 1 through 3. At number 1, we begin with Anthony Richardson, quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts, going up against the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau Field this week. Last week, the Packers went toe-to-toe with the Philadelphia Eagles and got their teeth kicked in Brazil. That defense definitely did not look great, and I think Anthony Richardson is going to have yet another huge performance. 3 total touchdowns last week with 1 INT up against the Houston Texans as the quarterback number 4. Anthony Richardson in any given game, due to his immense amount of rushing upside, has the upside to be the quarterback number 1. I love this matchup up against the Green Bay Packers, and I believe that Anthony Richardson belongs at the top, the head of the table. Shout out Roman Reigns. At number 2, we got Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles going up against the Atlanta Falcons at home in Philadelphia on Monday Night Football. Now, last week was a bit of a doozy for Jalen Hurts as he threw 2 interceptions, which obviously hurts his fantasy football outcome. Plus, Saquon Barkley runned in 3 touchdowns, which also didn't help out Jalen Hurts a ton. Still, though, he was the quarterback 10 and had a relatively decent game. I expect a bounce back out of Jalen Hurts here. Another guy with so much rushing upside that I don't think in a matchup like this up against the Falcons, where it's a very solid matchup, you can really have him ranked any lower than a top 5 quarterback, currently my number 2 QB on the week. At number 3, we got Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens going up against the Las Vegas Raiders at home in Baltimore. Now, last week he was the quarterback 5. Probably should have had 2 touchdowns, but instead he only got 1 because he missed Zay Flowers wide open, and Isaiah Likely's big toe was a little bit too big, so he couldn't toe tap into the end zone. Lamar rushed for 122 yards in that game. Again, rushing upside at the quarterback position is incredibly key towards success in fantasy football. You know what else is very great in fantasy football? Going up against a defense like the Las Vegas Raiders that cannot stop a nosebleed. I love Lamar Jackson this week, and he is currently my quarterback 3. Moving on into the A tier, we have my quarterbacks 4, 5, and 6. At number 4, we have Patrick Mahomes. Now, despite the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs looked great, Tony the Tiger style, in week 1 up against the Ravens, Mahomes only threw for 1 touchdown with an INT, which resulted in a finish as the quarterback number 14. This week up against the Cincinnati Bengals should be very interesting because this is a game that on paper could be a very high scoring affair, a real back and forth affair, but also since the Cincinnati Bengals needed some honey pack last week, they were completely limp dick in dire need of Viagra. If the Bengals offense doesn't show up, we might not see Patrick Mahomes really eclipse a humongous game here because the Bengals won't push them to have to throw the ball a ton. But with all of the weapons around Patrick Mahomes and with how skilled Patrick Mahomes is this early on in the season, I am not ready to give up on Patrick Mahomes yet. Next up, we got Kyler Murray, the short king of the Arizona Cardinals, going up against the Los Angeles Rams. Now, last week up against the Buffalo Bills in a relatively solid matchup, Kyler Murray did only end up scoring 1 touchdown, but he definitely looked solid out there. If they start trying to force feed the ball a little bit more to Marvin Harrison Jr., I think that is going to further enhance his upside game in and game out. We saw the rushing upside in play last week, rushing 5 times for 57 yards. So if he's able to get, instead of 1 touchdown, 2 touchdowns, or maybe even 3 touchdowns with multiple rushing touchdowns, this is another guy that you always have to be ranking super duper high because of the upside that he has with his legs. Plus, this matchup up against the LA Rams could be one of the highest scoring, if not the highest scoring game on the week. Next up, we move to Jaden Stormy Daniels, quarterback of the left hands up. Who are we? The Commanders, going up against the New York Football Giants. Now, Jaden Daniels in his debut game up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, while they ultimately get Cleveland steamered in that game, Jaden Daniels was the quarterback number 3 because of the immense amount of rushing upside that he has. I know I've said that word a gazillion times in today's video, but rushing upside means so much in fantasy football. Rushing upside gives you a easy path to the top. That's why they call rushing quarterbacks Konami code quarterbacks. Well, I think that sounds a little lame. Ultimately, it is true. It is overpowered to have a rushing quarterback, especially when that rushing quarterback is going up against the Giants. A defense that let Sam Darnold, Justin Jefferson, Ron Jones go absolutely hog wild in that game. So while this is a division matchup, and maybe that could lead to it being a little bit lower scoring, this is a defense that reeks to high heaven. And Daniel Jones, while he did absolutely suck donkey cock last week, the Commanders' defense is so bad that he might be able to have a solid game to push Jaden Stormy Daniels even further in this matchup, but he feels like a stone cold lock to be a top 6 quarterback in a great matchup like this. Then he plays the Bengals, then the Cardinals, so he might rip off 4 straight games as a top 6 quarterback. Next up, we move on into the B tier with CJ Stroud going up against the Chicago Bears. Now, my priors would tell me that the Chicago Bears defense is very solid. In week number 1, the Chicago Bears defense looked pretty solid. So this matchup on paper is far from a wet dream, right? It's not like Jaden Daniels going up against the Giants. This is a much tougher matchup. CJ Stroud was the quarterback 8 last week up against the Indianapolis Colts, and I think he should be able to do something similar this week. CJ Stroud is one of the safest quarterbacks in fantasy football. Why is that? Because he has so many weapons around him. He has Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Joe Mixon, and Dalton Schultz when he's healthy. So there's a lot of guys to throw the ball to. His upside is, in a way, capped by his rushing upside. He had 4 rushes for 13 yards last week, and I don't really ever expect CJ Stroud to go out there and juke a guy's shoes off of him or something like that, but he's going to be very consistent due to his passing ability, and if he throws for maybe 4 touchdowns in a game, he could eclipse the top 3 and even be the quarterback 1, but his upside is lessened by the fact that he doesn't have a high rushing pedigree. Next up, we got the Goffinator, Jared Goff, going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is another game that I could really see being one of the highest scoring games of the week. Last week, Jared Goff was Jared Goff, quarterback number 18. I think Jared Goff is a pretty safe bet to finish anywhere from quarterback 8 to 16 every single week. He has a great allotment of weaponry around him. Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. But ultimately, his upside is limited by his rushing ability and by the fact that once they get onto the goal line, a lot of the time they're not trying to pass. Once they get inside especially in the red zone, they will be comfortable running. Storming the ball in with the tag team of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. But still, Jared Goff does have high upside in a matchup like this that oozes of points. Next up, we move to Brock Purdy, big cock Brock, quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, going up against the cold like Minnesota Vikings this week as my quarterback number 9. Now, Brock Purdy last week was a bit of a doozy for him, right? He hit Brandon Ayuk directly in the hands. The guy drops the ball, but I don't expect that to be the case going forward. I think Brandon Ayuk will figure it out, and I also think it's very unlikely that big cock Brock with the Avengers around him, the Avengers assembling, will throw 0 touchdowns in a game, right? 0 touchdowns, 0 INTs. The Vikings defense looked good last week up against the Giants, but you could put the school of blind and deaf out there and they'd be able to stop Daniel fucking Jones. So Brock Purdy should be in for a bounce back week. And Brock Purdy's another one of those guys that is super safe game in and game out. Next up, we move to Dakota Prescott, Dak Prescott, quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, going up against the New Orleans Saints. So week 1 in Cleveland was sad for Dak Prescott because we kind of knew, even though you drafted him super highly in your fantasy football drafts, or I guess not super highly, you didn't pay some top 5 round price, but based on where you got him, you were definitely hoping for better than a quarterback 22 performance. But we know going into last week that this was a very bad matchup for him. The Cleveland Browns defense is rock solid. So Dak being the quarterback 22 wasn't all that crazy. I know the Saints absolutely locked up the Carolina Panthers last week, but I think that's a lot more telling that the Panthers offense sucks dong compared to the fact that the New Orleans Saints have one of the best defenses in the National Football League. I think Dak will have a better game. CD will have a better game. Dak, another one of those guys that feels like wrapping a condom around your team. Super duper safe. Next up, we got my quarterback number 11, Matthew Stafford, going up against the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona. Quarterback 12 last week, and I think he should be able to have a very similar performance this week. Arizona Cardinals defense is like cutting through butter with a fucking lightsaber, right? It is incredibly easy. I think Matthew Stafford will have no problem, big fella, having a very safe performance. So while Matthew Stafford, another one of those guys with basically zero rushing upside, he had 0 rushes last week, I do believe he should finish inside of the top 12, mostly due to the fact that the matchup is amazing. It hurts. It sucks that Puka Nacua is hurt, but with Demarcus Robinson, Cooper Kupp, Kobe Parkinson, Tyler Johnson, everything will be okay. Obviously, it'd be better if Puka was out there, but it's not DEFCON 5 here. Next up, we move to Baker Mayfield, quarterback of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, going up against the Detroit Lions in Detroit this week. Quarterback 2 last week as Baker Mayfield hit the Washington Commanders with the 619 Rey Mysterio. He hit him with the spear from fucking Roman Reigns. It was beautiful to watch. Not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 touchdowns. Yeah, in that game. And while I doubt he throws for 4 touchdowns up against the Lions like he did up against the Commanders, I really do believe that this could be a game where the Lions are up and Baker is crawling in from the back. They're going to have to pause. They're going to have to throw the ball a bunch in this game. Great matchup for Baker Mayfield, and man, I just can't quit Baker Mayfield. I just always fall in love with him. He's such a fun quarterback to watch. I love cheering him on. I loved back in college when he grabbed his nuts up against Kansas. I've liked Baker for a long time, so I was very excited with what I saw last week, and I think Baker, without Dave Canales, which was a huge worry, like, oh, they lose Dave Canales, Baker Mayfield's going to fall off the edge of the earth. That hasn't appeared to be the case just yet. Next up, we move on into the C tier, beginning with Justin Fields. Now, Justin Fields last week had a rare mid-game. Normally, Justin Fields is out there absolutely piping down the defense like an Italian plumber named Mario or Luigi, or he is out there terrible, down astronomical, doing diddly squat. Last week, he finished as the quarterback, 19-12 fantasy points, but he was pretty proficient throwing the rock, 17 of 23 for 156 yards, 14 carries for 57 yards. Why you play Justin Fields is the rushing upside. You don't play him because you expect him to go out there and dissect the defense like they're a frog in your high school chemistry class, right? You expect Justin Fields to go out there, make some good plays, maybe make some pants on the head, stupid plays, but you are expecting him to run the ball and run the ball a ton. And up against a Denver Broncos defense that outside of a few players, most notably Patrick Surtain II, Justin Fields should have no issue running a train on this team. Now, we know Justin Fields to be incredibly inconsistent, so I can't sit here, give him the gawk 9,000 special here, fondle his metaphorical balls, and tell you he's a lock to be a top 5 quarterback, but the upside is there. Now, there is still a 0.0001% chance Mr. Unlimited is in as the starting quarterback, but I truly do believe that Justin Fields will be the QB1 in this game. And while he is not as safe as the guys ahead of him, I can definitely see him finishing the week inside of the top 5 or maybe even as the quarterback 1 because, again, that Denver Broncos defense outside of Surtain reeks to high heaven. Next up, we move to Joe Shiesty, Joe Burrow, fucking Slim Shiesty. Last week was so bad for Joe Burrow. Now, technically, 21 of 29 isn't terrible, but when you put into consideration that it was up against the Patriots, and you put into consideration that Jamar Chase actually played, it was no bueno. Joe Burrow and the Bengals are incredibly slow starters. They come out the gate just with nothing. They gave nothing in that game, and the Patriots cruised. They rolled their windows down and cruised to victory. This week up against the Chiefs, he needs to wake up. He needs to get up. But the problem with Burrow and the Bengals and Zach Taylor's dumbass is they always start slow. So while this would be the perfect matchup, right? 4:25, there's only a couple of games on at 4 o'clock. Joe Burrow wakes up. This is a super fun, back and forth, rock'em sock'em, robots, red versus blue, Halo style, fun matchup. This could be one where the Bengals are getting dicked down relentlessly by Pat Mahomes and friends. So I'm not ready to fully get the fucking shovel out and bury Joe Burrow, but I'm starting to panic. Next up, we got touchdown Jesus, Trevor Lawrence, quarterback of the Jacksonville Jaguars, going up against the Browns. Not so hot performance up against my Dolphins. They lose that game, but sadly all for nothing as a Dolphins fan because Tua Tagovailoa is hurt, and I had to cry myself to sleep after that happened on Thursday Night Football. Quarterback 23 last week for Trevor Lawrence, getting yet another fearsome matchup up against the Cleveland Browns defense, which is even better than the Dolphins defense. Ultimately, Trevor Lawrence has enough weapons around him to keep his head above water, but I don't think this will be his best matchup, as he does have some softer matchups lining up as the season comes to a close, especially like week 16, week 17 against the Raiders and the Titans. He has other great matchups in there against the Packers, the Colts, the Texans, matchups where I just feel like he'll do better than in these first two games. I'm still fine starting him, but all of the guys in the S through the B tier, you should have no problem playing those guys. Now we're getting into the range where it is a little bit more spicy, and hopefully you don't have to play any of these guys. Next up, we move on into the D tier, headlined by Justin Herbert, the pervert. They have massacred my boy. They have turned Justin Herbert into a game manager. They have turned Justin Herbert from a gunslinger, Brett Favre, into a guy that just doesn't need to make any mistakes and you'll win. The LA Chargers want to run the ball gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 merrily. Life is but a dream. Fucking Joe Alt locked up Max Crosby. Don't let me out, and threw away the key. Max Crosby could do fucking nothing. He did nothing. They're just going to run the ball. Herbert's going to throw the ball 25 to 28 times a game, and they're going to win. They're going up against the Panthers, a defense that I wouldn't wipe my ass with, so Herbert should be fine. But against the Raiders last week, he was only the quarterback 24. I told you guys about this all summer, though, so don't blame me if you drafted Herbert. I told you not to. Next up, we got Aaron Rodgers going up against the Tennessee Titans in Tennessee. Green 19, set. Aaron Rodgers threw one touchdown in that game up against the 49ers to Allen Lazard, of course, right? And then they end up benching him. Tyrod Taylor, legendary quarterback, comes on into the game and throws another one to Allen Lazard, of course. Now, going up against the Titans, a much softer defense now, getting the monkey off the back in the first game. I expect Rodgers to bounce back, but the Titans defense also looked very good last week, so I'm not ready to full on be like, bang, 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 you need to start Aaron Rodgers, but we're getting close. Next up, we got Kirk Thuggins, Kirk Go Chains, quarterback 28 last week. Shit was not sweet for Kirk Cousins last week. Cole's Cash Kirk. He looked atrocious. He looked putrid. It was almost laughable watching him play. Wasn't setting his feet correctly, throwing off the back foot, throwing off the front foot, looking in the complete wrong directions. He looked like trash, coming off the Achilles. Not good. Not ready to rank him highly yet, but I do think eventually he will be able to shake it off like that Taylor Swift song and play a lot better. The matchup up against the Eagles is good, but again, it's a primetime matchup, and he's Kirk Cousins. Next up, we got Caleb Williams. Now, Caleb Williams, we're talking about bad performances. Caleb Williams did nothing. Not even 100 passing yards. He had 100 total yards because he had 93 passing yards and 15 rushing yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 INTs. He gets a participation trophy for winning that game. They won, but it wasn't because, like, what we probably thought would have happened, right, where Caleb Williams comes out first game, wiki, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze. He just goes nuclear. He's hitting everyone left and right. Incredible accuracy, stuff we saw out of college. Throwing fucking dimes on the move. Fucking throwing the ball behind his back like he's playing Street, the video game, NFL Street 2. Jumping off the wall, right? But no, we just saw the most incredibly boring game you've ever seen out of this guy. I think he will bounce back eventually. But again, why would I put so much hope into a guy? Look, I already was hopeful last week. He kicked me in the gonads. I'm not cutting him off my team, but I think brighter days are ahead for Mr. Caleb Williams. Final guy in today's video at the quarterback position is throw it on a dime like I ain't even trying. Daniel Jones. Danny fumbles, Danny stumbles. He was the nut low quarterback last last week, quarterback 32, but he is, I believe, smashing that chick that is on NFL Network, I think, who is very nice looking. Not as good looking as my fiance, of course, but very nice. So shout out to Daniel Jones for doing that, but he sucks. Daniel Jones, again, like you could replace him with Stevie Wonder and that might work better. The Commanders' defense is softer than baby shit, so there should be a bounce back inevitable here. This should be a huge game out of Daniel Jones, but I'm not going to give him the crown. I'm not even going to give him any credit because he's so bad that he could even mess up a wet dream matchup up against the Commanders' defense. Woo-woo. Now we move on into the tight end position. That was the transition music, of course, with my tight ends 1 through 3 in the S tier, tier numero uno, Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, and Travis Kelce. Laporta, pretty mid-game week 1, but compared to some of the other tight ends we're going to talk to, it actually looked pretty good, or talk about. He looked pretty good. Not a great game, though, for his standards. After week 1, we're just not going to bury guys that we drafted super highly. We're not just going to go ahead and overreact to something that happened in one game. Bucs defense, again, great matchup. So Sam Laporta should finish as the tight end 1. At number 2, we got Trey McBride up against the Rams. He scored 8 fantasy points, tight end 11. Again, while that isn't the best for McBride standards, for tight end standards based upon where you drafted him, compared to some of the other guys, you would have been just absolutely ecstatic to have had Trey McBride. 9 targets, 5 receptions, 30 receiving yards. Kyler clearly loves to target Trey McBride, and again, I expect this offense to be in a game that could lead to a firefight here. Trey McBride, you draft him inside top 5 tight ends, so again, we're not full-on panicking just yet on his ranking. At number 3, the exact same thing here could be said about Travis Kelce. 3 receptions on 4 targets for 34 yards. Now, you could say, oh, Travis Kelce's getting older, so they're not going to use him as much, this, that, and the other thing. I don't really think that is going to be the case. I still think Kelce's one of the best, if not the best, tight end in the NFL, and when the Chiefs are percolating, when the Chiefs are moving the ball, when the Chiefs are playing the best, Kelce is very involved. He dominates in the red zone, and I just expect us to look back at the end of the season and be like, oh, week 1 where he only scored 6 fantasy points, maybe we shouldn't have completely and utterly panicked after one game. Now we move on into the A tier with tight end number 4, Easy Evan Ingram of the Jacksonville Jaguars, going up against the Cleveland Browns this week. Cleveland Browns, normally not the best up against the tight end. Evan Ingram was one of those guys that was sleeping behind the wheel in week 1, sleeping with the fishes, Luca Brasi style. Just 1 reception on 4 targets for 5 yards, 2 fantasy points. Evan Ingram, normally one of the safest tight ends in fantasy football over the last 2 years with the Jags. That game was the opposite of safe. It was raw sex, no condom there, and it was no bueno for us Evan Ingram owners. But again, nothing to worry about. Just move things over. Next up, we got Kyle Pitts. And while Kyle Pitts didn't have a huge performance, he was the tight end 4, and he scored a touchdown. Hallelujah. 3 targets, 3 receptions, 26 yards. Now, until Kirk Cousins truly figures things out, we can't really sit here and give the Hawk 2 a special to Kyle Pitts, because if Kirk Cousins looks like how he looked last week for the whole season, then Kyle Pitts is going to be a bust for what feels like the 8,000th year in a row. But as Kirk figures it out, that's going to help out Kyle Pitts a ton. The matchup's also very solid, but I'm not ready to just jolt him up into the S tier because of the play of Kirk Thuggins. Next up, we got George Kittle. Now, we know what George Kittle is. Last week, he actually had a rare mid-game. Justin Fields typically never has a mid-game, in my opinion. Kittle definitely never has mid-games. Normally, he is either on top of the charts, back in your hearts, as like a top 3 tight end, or he has 2 fantasy points, right? He's either scoring 3 touchdowns, hitting the fucking Hingle McCringleberry in the end zone 3 different times, or he has 1 catch or 0 catches. He's out there laying pancakes like he works at McDonald's. The hot cakes from McDonald's, amazing. Shout out to McDonald's. No free shout outs though. We have a real sponsorship of today's video because McDonald's doesn't sponsor me, but George Kittle, he's hit or miss. I guess you never miss, huh? Up against the Vikings, a good matchup for him. If he shits the bed, you won't be shocked. If he has a huge game, you won't be shocked. So that's always going to put him inside of the A tier. Next up, we move to Mark Andrews, who had a down game. Now, I told everyone all of this week so far not to panic on Mark Andrews. He was bracketed. They were triple covering him, double covering him. The Chiefs basically said, beat us with Flowers, beat us with Likely, because Andrews is not even going to be part of the equation in this matchup. 2 targets, 2 receptions, 14 yards. You also have to keep in mind that maybe he was a little bit squirmish, sluggish, coming off of the car accident. So while the car accident wasn't like reported to be something that was going to greatly affect him, maybe it played a slight effect into things. Again, though, one poor matchup with one of the best tight ends in the NFL. You guys shouldn't be jumping ship. And I think the Las Vegas Raiders is a great matchup for him to come back. Next up, we got Isaiah Likely. Now, if you want to say, Nick, I'd rather rank Likely higher because Likely actually scored 26 fantasy points last week. He was really the only good tight end, so I'm going to play him instead of Andrews. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. I think he could easily outscore Andrews. I'm not going to say that you're crazy for thinking that. Again, this is a wet dream matchup. 9 receptions, 12 targets, 111 yards up against the Chiefs last week, and a tug. Should have been 2 tugs if his feet were just slightly smaller. I like Isaiah Likely. I've always liked Likely. His issue was he was always just stuck behind Andrews. I still think Andrews is going to out-target him on the season. But again, this is not meant to belittle Likely as he is ranked relatively high. Next up, we got Brock Bowers of the Las Vegas Raiders going up against the Baltimore Ravens. Now, a lot of the talk towards the end of the summer was that Brock Bowers was going to get a lot of easy targets. They want to get him the ball early and often in the game. They drafted him highly in the NFL draft because they want to give him touches. They believe in the talent, the Mackey Award winner, right? They believe that this guy has all the skills to pay the bills, and week 1 showed that. Tight end 3, 6 receptions, 8 targets, 58 yards. Now, his upside of really slapping, because in a normal week, 12 fantasy points doesn't get you a top 3 performance, right? But the thing that's holding him back, restraining him from slapping off the chain, having those huge games, is the team. The team, frankly, just the team just is not very good. The quarterback play is not very good. So that's what's going to restrict him from having those huge games, but he does feel very safe, in my opinion. Next up, we got Kobe Parkinson to clear out the second tier here, tier A. 9 fantasy points last week, tight end number 7, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 47 yards. Without Puka Nacua, we're going to see more Kobe Parkinson. Without Tyler Higbee, Kobe Parkinson is in the driver's seat as the tight end 1. Now, Parkinson isn't like the most fun selection, right? You could really see Kittle scoring like 25 fantasy points. You could see Pitts having a huge game, Andrews, likely these other guys. Whereas Bowers and Parkinson, they're a little bit less sexy of picks, but I do think they will both end up being solid, thus belonging inside of the A tier. Now we move on down into the B tier. So the guys in the S and the A tier, I feel very confident in that they should have good games, except for, I guess, Kittle, who could be pretty hit or miss, but the other guys feel very safe. Now you're getting into the range where it's like, okay, I kind of have to start this guy, but I don't love it as much. So we begin with Dallas Goedert, tight end 12 last week, now going up against the Falcons. If Kellen Moore gets the tight end more integrated than normal in this offense, I think Goddard will be fine, but he's going to get about 5 targets per game. If he doesn't score, you're probably going to end up with like 6 or 7 fantasy points. If he does score, you'll end up with a halfway decent day. Doesn't feel super fun, but I think that Goddard does feel in that range of tight end that's going to get you like 7-8 points every single week. Next up, we move to Pat Freiermuth, but before we break down the rest of the tight ends, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our sponsor over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, if you are new to Underdog Fantasy and check out the link in the video description or use promo code Notorious, you will get a free pick like Caleb Williams higher than half of a total yard. You match that pick with another pick from one of Sunday's games or from the Houston Texans or a player on Monday Night Football, and you'll receive 3 times your entry fee, whatever you put on into your pick'em. So make sure you guys check that out. Promo code Notorious. You get the free pick like Caleb Williams higher than half of a yard. Again, you match that with one other pick, and you receive 3 times what you put in there. You will also receive, based upon if you are a new depositor using promo code Notorious, bonus cash of up to $1,000. So make sure you guys check that out. Again, promo code Notorious on Underdog Fantasy. Pat Freiermuth has a great matchup this week up against the Denver Broncos. The problem is Justin Fields isn't necessarily the greatest quarterback on earth, but the team doesn't really have a crazy amount of targets outside of George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth. So Freiermuth could have a great game. Last week, we didn't see a crazy amount. He went 4 for 4 like he was at Wendy's for 27 yards. We know the upside's there because we've seen it out of Freiermuth in the past. It's kind of just in the eye of, hey, will Justin Fields actually give him enough targets? Next up, we got Dalton Schultz. Now, Schultz technically may not end up playing. He is off of the injury report as of now, so I guess that was a lie. He was sidelined in practice earlier on in the week, but now I guess he is good to go. His outlook is looking great. I guess, even though 2 days ago his outlook was looking real murky. I think that Dalton Schultz, he is a guy that you play because he's on the Texans. Now, last week we saw how that could end. 5 fucking points. But we also know how it could end where Stroud throws him a touchdown. Stroud throws him 2 touchdowns. He throws him 8 balls. And the Texans score 8 million points and Schultz has a great game. Safe? No, but the upside is there. Speaking of, is he safe? No, but the upside is there. Taysom Hill. They threw Taysom Hill a fade route last week. They threw a fucking jump up, try to catch that ball in the end zone. He ran the ball 5 times. He could even throw the ball in any given game. Is he safe? Of course not. He scored 5 points last week, but he is like one of the few tight ends that can score 20 points in any given game. Next up, we move to my ball, Zach Ertz, which is just a team name that people have had for years, going up against the Giants. Pretty so-so game in week 1, but he is the tight end 1 very clearly over Ben Sinnott. 4 targets, 3 receptions, 28 yards, 6 fantasy points. Great matchup here up against the Giants. If Jaden Stormy Daniels throws more touchdowns, throws the ball a little bit more, I think Zach Ertz could be halfway decent again, mostly getting boosted up because of the matchup. Closing out the B tier, we got Tyler Conklin going up against the Tennessee Titans. Really bad game in week 1, only 2 targets, 1 reception, but a lot of that could be due to the matchup against the 49ers and due to Rodgers trying to get comfortable in this offense in a real game setting. Sure, he practiced all summer, was getting, practice in there, but there's nothing compared to the game feel where you're actually getting fucking hit by guys that'll run you over and you won't be able to walk for the next month, right? So Tyler Conklin should be having better days ahead. We do know there have been games in the past where Rodgers locks into his tight end. Conklin is one of the more underrated tight ends in the NFL. So again, when you're basically picking from the bottom of the barrel, there's worse options than Conklin, and those worse options are in the C tier. Hunter Henry, Cade Otton, and Cole Kmet. Now, Hunter Henry, probably in terms of just overall skill, one of the more skilled players in this offense. Probably behind Ramondre Stevenson. But, and this is a big but, shout out to Alexis Texas. Seattle defense looked pretty good. 100% didn't look good. So the upside is capped there. Next up, we got Cade Otton. Just kind of held back by the fact that they have so many other weapons in this offense. There's going to be games, though, where Baker finds him in the end zone. There's going to be games where he gets more than 2 targets. He's a very talented tight end. Just kind of a lot of cooks in the kitchen there. Cole Kmet basically just held at the mercy of Caleb Williams. If Caleb Williams looks like he did last week, Cole Kmet won't be successful. He's in the same situation, though, as Otton as well, where there's just so many players on the team. Final guy here is Mike Gesicki. Mike Gesicki did end up scoring a touchdown last week, but it did end up getting called back. Just 5 fantasy points last week, though he did see 4 targets. No T. Higgins, more than likely. So if Jamar Chase is there, and then they kind of are trying to use Gesicki a bunch, Gesicki could score. So again, while there's worse options than Gesicki, any of the guys in the C tier, you definitely don't want to have to be starting. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did end up enjoying today's video, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below like it owes you some money. Please leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. Check out Underdog Fantasy. Promo code Notorious to get that free pick of Caleb Williams higher than half of a total yard, as well as that bonus cash of up to $1,000. Promo code Notorious. Click on the link in the video description. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great one. Shout out Wayne Gretzky. Have a great rest of your guys' day. And as always, good boy.